favorite type of board game are dungeon crawlers. There is something intrinsically interesting and magnetic about a group of adventurers trying to figure out the secrets of catacombs, tombs, and cave systems in places such as the Old World or the Dungeons and Dragons universes. If you combine it with the fact that you can include miniatures and you can paint them and make those places even more interesting and more appealing to your players, then you have a game winner, of course. But surprisingly enough, today we are not going to talk about miniatures. Not at all. I'm going to tell you how I made my games look a little bit better with the help of a friend from Italy. Buckle up, brass lickers, because it's going to be a wild ride. As an almost full-time nerd, I receive packets on the mail almost every day. And you probably can relate to this. But on this particular case, saying that I was super excited is an understatement. My friend Gabriele from Magic Dice Manufacturing decided that I needed something to make my dungeons look better. And he took this, well, actually very literally. And I'm gonna tell you something, well, I'm not gonna tell you something, I'm gonna show you. It was amazing. When you are using plastic and metal miniatures and your dungeons are made of cardboard, well, yes, it helps a lot with storage and moving it around, but they feel a little bit bland, don't they? To be a good dungeon crawler in my books needs a few characteristics. First and foremost, it needs to take place in an interesting setting. Personally, I enjoy high fantasy settings where you can fight different types of monsters and use magic. Secondly, and at least for me, it needs to have miniatures. In this way you can combine a couple of factors because you can play a game that is interesting and immersive, and then you also have the hobby component of building and painting your miniatures for it. Of course, there is also the issue with the rules. If the rules are good and they are immersive, then the game is going to be, well, quite replayable and is going to tie you to it for a lot of time. And if the rules are not that interesting, well, you can always go online and find solutions that people have created for you in order to tweak them, adapt them, or modernize them a little bit. But one aspect that really didn't bother me until I started seeing it online was that you could make it look much better if you actually applied a lot of the concepts that you could do in the miniatures to the dungeon itself. Of course, you can always make your own tiles, or you can buy a 3D printer. I would love to have a 3D printer, but I think it will take a while for me to learn how to use it, and my pile of shame is hefty enough as it is. Enter Gabriele from Magic Dice Manufacturing.
Miguel is such a great person.
I'm gonna replay that because I didn't get it the first time.
Miguel is such a great person.
Yeah, I think that's me. I love it.
He offered me his support since the very beginning without asking me nothing back.
This handsome Italian has a great YouTube channel where he crafts all kinds of different scenery for his dungeons. And believe me, when he decided to send this box to me, I was excited in a way that I haven't been for a while. Because I know how good he is at making things, and this seemed like a great opportunity to stop having excuses and upgrade my dungeons for my Warhammer Quest games. Inside the box I was greeted by several tiles in different configurations. This is a clever solution because you can combine them in several ways to make corners, corridors, or big halls. It also includes doors and the quintessential staircase to come back and forth from the surface to the dungeon. Gabriele sent me the unpainted version of his dungeon, so I decided to put my hands to the work and get it painted as soon as possible. And it wouldn't be that difficult because I used my trusty airbrush for this. Now, of course, you don't have to have an airbrush. You can do dry brushing very easily on these tiles, and he does that masterfully with his own, which, by the way, you can buy painted from him. The tiles are very easy to paint either way, and I was having a lot of fun using my airbrush for this. Since they came primed in black, what I did is with my airbrush, I just gave some accents in pure white in places that I considered that will benefit from it. Basically the center of the tiles and the center of the whole board section, and also on the sides and the corners. Some tiles also have some patterns on that, and obviously you can emphasize that using your airbrush like I was doing here on these ones with those diagonal sections. For the doors, I gave them a zenithal highlight that will be very useful when I painted them with the colors next. Next, I started using acrylic inks. I like inks for my airbrush because it makes things much easier. They are already well diluted, they have a lot of pigment, and they work fantastically well for what I'm trying to do here. Because I'm painting them to look more or less like the tiles that I have from my Warhammer Quest, I'm trying to emulate those 90s tiles the best way I can. And believe me, for this, the inks work fantastically well. What will be rush the wash without using contrast paints? Of course, I'm gonna use them because they are very useful to paint things with texture such as tiles. I find Leviathan Blue one of the most useful colors of the range, although people don't really like it because it's super saturated, but if you dilute it a little bit with water, you can do great things with that. Notice how I do that in order to paint both the black squares and the white ones. Both are painted with Leviathan Blue. A great deal of the final look of any tiles is what is the primer color that you used before. This is quite obvious if you have been painting for a while, but it's noticeable if I paint with yellow color on top of black, how it becomes a somewhat brown color. Next is highlights. I just mix the colors that I use with a little bit of white, and I focus on the particular areas that are gonna make the tiles look more three-dimensional. Yes, I know I say this word quite often, but when you're painting at the smaller scales, three-dimensionality has to be exaggerated with highlights and shadows, and the tiles, well, the tiles still work in the same premise. As you can see in the video, I'm highlighting the central area of the tiles. That's it. I'm not touching the borders, I'm just touching a little bit in the centerpiece of each one of the separate tiles. The doors and the stairs, on the other hand, I decided to paint with gray. Here's where that zenithal priming that I did with the white on top of the black is going to prove invaluable, because those gradients are going to make the transitions between the light and the dark areas in gray much more accentuated and natural. And speaking of natural looking underground caverns and dungeons, one thing that they will probably have is a lot of filth, a lot of mud, and some algae and lichen growing in the recesses. The way I represented this was super straightforward. You can do this with a brush or some cotton, but I'm using my trusty airbrush for this. The thing is to just dilute that ink with a little bit of water and paint in between the crevices where you think that the filth will, just go to. I enjoy this step very much because I don't know why making your tiles a little bit dirty make them look so much better and much more natural, and it's so easy and straightforward. It is very enjoyable. After that was done, I decided to do a little bit of extra highlights with a dry brush with some off-white bone color. This way I could fix some issues where my contrast paints stain too much or I put too much brown, etc. At the same time, the dry brush is going to make all the different color tiles look okay when they are sitting next to each other. Even if the colors are different, the highlight is going to make them more homogeneous and they will not look off when you put them together. To finish it all off, there were a few details that I needed to touch up, like the hinges in the doors, painting the borders of the bases in black, making sure that they look neat, and adding a little bit of green with a cotton bud to make sure that the dungeon looked not only dirty, but a little bit dank. I love my tiny copy of Warhammer Quest with my tiles made at 15mm scale. But they are still cardboard, and even though the game looks fantastic, I think it's still missing something, When you use miniatures and they are like three-dimensional figures, your dungeons look a little bit stale. If they are made of paper, of course, they are not gonna look that great. And cardboard, all things considered, is still a little bit papery. I always thought that having tiles wasn't a big deal, but honestly, after I painted mine and put them on the table with the miniatures on top, I was absolutely in love with them. There is no way I'm going back to cardboard unless it's absolutely necessary, and I'm gonna tell you something, make sure that you check Gabriele's store because he makes absolutely fantastic stuff over there, and I honestly think that for something that is handcrafted, it is very, very affordable. Is it absolutely necessary for you to have 3D tiles? No, it is not. You can play with the cardboard very easily. You can even draw the dungeons on a whiteboard or anything like that. But does it make it look better? Yes, yes it does. Gabriele has made a beautiful job. You should follow him on his channel as well, because he has plenty of ideas and he keeps building stuff that is amazing. And if you don't have time to build your own tiles, like I don't, well, what about getting some from him? And I tell you, you're gonna love it. They are gonna be super enjoyable to paint and your dungeons are gonna look better than ever before. Watch this video next, and remember guys that my name is Miguel, this has been Rush the Wash, and I'll catch you in the next one. Un beso, adios.